Welcome to the Reality Taboo, where no topic is off limits. It's April 17th, 2024. I'm Jeff. Joining me is my co-host Ness. Today's topic is abortion. We're going to approach it from a broad philosophical, moral perspective, as well as a political issue, specifically in the context of the 2024 American presidential election. So I went to ChatGPT, which is becoming one of my favorite resources when I'm preparing for these shows, and I was curious what it would, how it would define abortion, and I think it gave a pretty good definition. Abortion is the termination of a pregnancy by removing or expelling the embryo or fetus from the uterus before it can survive outside the womb. This can happen spontaneously, known as a miscarriage, or it can be induced intentionally through medical procedures. When a pregnancy is ended after the point when the fetus is capable of surviving outside the womb, it's typically referred to as a late-term abortion or post-viability abortion. Viability refers to the stage of pregnancy at which a fetus has the potential to survive outside the uterus with medical assistance, usually around 24 weeks of gestation or later. So before we get into the politics of abortion, I want to touch a little bit on the morality of abortion. So from a Christian perspective, I think there's plenty of evidence for a pro-life position. I found some Bible verses that are often put forward as the case for a pro-life position. Psalm 139, 13 through 16, For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. We have the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. The Roman Catholic Church and various Protestant groups have official doctrinal statements which oppose abortion. Then going to the New Testament, Luke chapter 1, when Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. And that's referring to John the Baptist is the baby in question. And so there's just a few verses that demonstrate the Christian basis for the pro-life position is rock solid. And the pro-choice position often complains that abortion restrictions, like we see with most recently with the Arizona law, that abortion restrictions are a step backwards. You often see in news articles stories of women in their 60s or 70s who have had abortions in the past and who took the ability to do so for granted, and now they're appalled that the right would be taken away. And you see the Handmaid's Tale invoked, and it's usually presented in terms of personal autonomy and a feminist perspective. It's a way for women to wrest control from the patriarchy and gain control over their lives and decide for themselves when they want to have kids or not have kids. And I actually think that the case for abortion is actually becoming less morally defensible as technology advances. A couple ways that I think that's the case is heartbeats. Due to technology, heartbeats are able to be detected a lot earlier than they previously were. As early as 6 weeks now, a heartbeat can be detected. And so if you're making the clump of cells argument, it's a lot harder to make when as soon as 6 weeks there can be a heartbeat detected. And the other reason would be that with medical technology, babies can survive outside the womb a lot earlier and a lot earlier in the pregnancy. Another interesting tidbit I found doing research, the evangelical pro-life movement didn't really begin until the late 1970s. And in 1968, Christianity Today, which was the main magazine of evangelicalism, it was founded in 1956 by Billy Graham. So in 1968, Christianity Today organized a conference with the Christian Medical Society to discuss the morality of abortion. And there were several 26 theologians from throughout the evangelical world who they debated the matter over several days and then issued a statement acknowledging the ambiguities surrounding the issue. And they said, quote, "Whether the performance of an induced abortion is sinful, we are not agreed. But about the necessity of it and permissibility for it under certain circumstances, we are in accord." So that surprised me. I assumed that, abortion is an issue that's been addressed for centuries. It's been pretty, I thought, at least unambiguous and universal that the Christian Protestants and Catholics were opposed to abortion. But now I'm not so sure, and we're going to discuss what changed, why by the 1980s was there such a strong pro-life movement that obviously was spurred on by Roe v. Wade, and then I would say reached its crest in 2022 when Roe v. Wade was overturned.
While there is plenty of scriptural evidence in favor of the pro-life position, the psalm that you referenced, which is probably the most heavily cited scriptural apology for the pro-life, anti-abortion position, is of course in the Old Testament, and Jews are really radically, as a group, pro-choice compared to any other group in the Western world. The General Social Survey shows that over 80% of self-identified Jews are in favor of women being able to have abortions for any reason whatsoever, which is far outside any other group. Blacks or Christians, whites, even self-described atheists have lower levels of support for unrestricted, unfettered abortion than Jews do. And of course, the Ten Commandments are also Old Testament. So these are teachings with scriptural basis that putatively would have just as much purchase for Jews as they do for Christians, and yet Christians generally, Catholics and Protestants alike, interpret the Psalms and those Old Testament teachings as being arguments in favor of the pro-life position, but Jews do not tend to interpret it in the same way. As far as Christianity today and the evangelical movement more broadly, coming together to come up with a unified, or at least an attempt at a unified statement in opposition to abortion. A reason I think that strikes many today as seeming out of place is because we take for granted that the Roe v. Wade, the post-Roe v. Wade landscape is similar to the pre-Roe v. Wade landscape, and it just wasn't the case. Abortion was virtually legally impossible to obtain really anywhere in the country without major extenuating circumstances through the 1950s, from the country's founding all the way through to the 1950s. In California, we're looking, in 1966 was when there was a case brought against 9 doctors who performed abortions, and it was only then that it spurred legislation that, according to Planned Parenthood, this is in 1966 in California, as a result of the trial of the San Francisco 9, quote, resulted in one of the first abortion reform measures in the United States. California amended its prohibition on abortion to allow hospital committees to approve requests for abortion, unquote. So even libertine, West Coast, socially permissive states in the 60s, prior to the 60s Cultural Revolution, were more restrictive with regards to abortion than a lot of the Deep South red states are today, certainly, than red states were prior to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. It's really worth keeping in mind just how radically the shift in the cultural and political moral landscape has been in the United States from the 70s through today. And we see that still also when comparing the United States to Europe. Generally, it's considered that Europe tends to be more permissive on a lot of different social issues, but reading now from Wikipedia, in Germany and Italy, abortion is quite restricted after 12 weeks. So we're talking first trimester, so second trimester, third trimester. Abortions have lots of restrictions on them. In France and in Spain, it's 14 weeks, so that's kind of the couple weeks into the second trimester. And then, quote, the longest term limits in terms of gestation are in the United Kingdom and in the Netherlands, and both of those extend to 24 weeks of gestation. So we're talking the first 2 trimesters. So effectively, throughout much of Europe, at least, if we're looking at the major population centers, Germany, Italy, France, Spain, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, not to mention places like Poland and Eastern Europe where abortion access is even more restricted, late-term abortions pretty much don't exist anywhere, whereas there are several blue states in the United States where late-term abortions up to the point of birth are permitted, not just permitted but subsidized.
I think the abortion issue, the morality of it, all comes down to the fundamental question of when does life begin? I think the earliest that I've ever seen people say life begins is at conception. So the point when the sperm and the egg meet. I don't think anybody makes the claim that an unfertilized egg is a life. So that would be on the early end. And then I guess on the very far end would be the second in the 9th month of a pregnancy, the second before the child leaves the womb would be on the far end of when life begins. So where you draw that line is going to determine whether abortion is sometimes or never permissible. And pro-life people generally believe life begins at conception. And so a life is brought into the world, and obviously you can't, what's more innocent than a baby? And so it's morally reprehensible to kill a baby. And I think even the strong pro-life people get uncomfortable when you start talking about abortion in the 3rd trimester. And I think that brings to mind the sort of 90s Democrat position, Clinton-era position on abortion. It should be safe, legal, and rare. I think that acknowledges that there's a discomfort the later on. And I think it also makes sense why maybe a more extreme, the pro-choice people have been forced to take a more extreme position than maybe they actually would want or how they actually feel, because you almost have to, because as soon as you agree that at some point before the baby comes out of the womb, abortion should be restricted, you're almost ceding the argument that that's a life. Presumably that's why you would not allow abortion, is because it's a human life and you don't want to kill it. But as soon as you acknowledge that, then you have to ask the question, okay, well, when does it become a life? And it gets very arbitrary. And really the only, the most rational, logical answer to that question of when does a life begin, I believe, is conception. And as soon as you say that, then it becomes a pretty clear case on why abortion should be impermissible under any circumstance. And I think this issue that some people, the pro-choice people, the discomfort they have with abortion, especially in the later stages, was addressed by Bill Maher recently. This was a few days ago, so April 2024. I'm going to play a clip.
The idea that you're fighting an election around this issue seems to be, just strange. Back to the 19th century.
Well, not if you believe it's murder. That's why I don't understand the 15-week thing. Or the Trump's plan is, let's leave it to the states. You mean, so killing babies is okay in some states? Like, I can respect the absolutist position. I really can. I scold the left on when they say, oh, you know what? They just hate women. People who aren't pro-life, pro-choice, they don't hate women. They just made that up. They think it's murder. And it kind of is. I'm just okay with that. I am. I mean, there's 8 billion people in the world. I'm sorry, we won't miss you. That's my position on it.
I would put that in the category of saying the quiet part out loud.
I think Bill Maher is giving voice to what a large percentage of people, if not a majority of people, think. So The Economist and YouGov did a poll at the end of February of this year, 2024. So this is well into the overturning of Roe v. Wade, asking several questions on abortion both political and moral in their dimensions, just 7% of respondents think that abortion should be legal in all cases. And yet, the same poll asked people, do you believe that abortion is murder? And 45% of respondents said, yes, abortion is murder. So you have 45% of respondents saying, yes, they believe that abortion is murder, but only 7% think it should be illegal in all cases. So you have a large share, almost 40% of the population, more or less agreeing with Bill Maher that, yes, abortion is murder, or maybe homicide at least. Abortion is the intentional taking of a human life, but only 7%, presumably that 7% that favors a complete restriction on abortion comes from the 45% that think it's murder. So among those who think abortion is murder, by 4-1, they believe that it should be legal, at least in some cases. I think we can assess, as we start to talk about abortion, we can get a good understanding of why the pro-choice side of the argument generally doesn't like abortion to be talked about in anything more than bumper sticker type of terms like my body, my choice, at least pre-COVID, because the overlap between people who supported mandating vaccines, i.e. experimental drugs being put into people's bodies potentially against their will, and the percentages who were strong supporters of choice, pro-choice, the overlap was very, very heavy. And so the my body, my choice was rhetorically inconvenient. And so now I'm struggling to think really what is the catchphrase, the one sentence or single phrase in support of abortion rights, maybe family planning, or I suppose the term reproductive rights, protecting reproductive rights. That's probably the one that's settled on, that is more or less replaced the phrase my body, my choice. But we can see when we start to lift up the hood and kind of evaluate this morally and philosophically, there are a lot of things that become quite uncomfortable for the pro-choice position. And so it's not surprising that over the years, the issue has become more and more associated with status and with class. It's a deplorable thing to oppose women's rights to an abortion, and it's an enlightened, right side of history position to be in favor of abortion rights, and that's about as deep as it goes. From this same poll also, 53% of respondents agree with the assertion that life begins at conception. So an outright majority of respondents in the United States, just as of a couple months ago, believe that life begins at conception. Yet again, as we alluded to previously, there's very little support for an outright ban on abortion.
So based on that poll, what percentage of Americans either believe abortion should be banned in all circumstances or should be allowed but in very limited circumstances?
In addition to the 7% that say that abortion should be legal and never allowed, another 32% say abortion should only be legal in special circumstances, i.e. when the life of the mother is in danger. So that's a little under 40% of the population is what we would generally consider pro-life from a political perspective. And that is, again, with reference to the fact that over half the population believes that life begins at conception, and 45% believe that abortion is murder. And circling back to that abortion is murder question, just 45% believe that it is not, with 10% being unsure. So it's split almost down the middle when it comes to the moral question. And yet the pro-choice position politically is more popular. And so again, I think that speaks to the fact that while Bill Maher's assertion might be a little shocking because of its candor, it's not something that is an orphan position among people who, at least privately, and when it comes to publicly speaking about abortion is so saturated in questions of status and political standing, cultural standing, and that sort of thing, that a lot of these questions haven't been explored. But once they are, we find that Bill Maher's position is more candid, just like Donald Trump's famous. Well, it was considered a gaffe at the time, but in the same way that Bill Maher is bringing some candor to the question, Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election was famously asked if women who commit abortions should be criminally prosecuted for it, potentially face criminal consequences if abortion is illegal. He gave the obvious answer that yes, because if something's illegal, if you're going to have a law, then you have to enforce the law, else there's no reason to have the law at all. He gave that very commonsensical answer that really just comes from the conclusion of the question naturally, and was lampooned by a lot of the, not just, of course, the pro-choice and the left, but a lot of the pro-life movement also came down on him. And Jeff has that clip actually queued up here of Trump back in 2016. I do want to note before we get to that, the argument that abortion, if the prior is that abortion is murder, then the exception for the life of the mother is a little bit morally questionable. I think most people would look askance at a mother who said she would not die for her daughter, or a father who wouldn't die for his daughter or his son. And so the idea that if it is a human life, the idea that you would sacrifice your child for your own well-being, well, that's morally horrendous. Fortunately, that is a hypothetical that is effectively a phantom. Statistically, virtually never happens. And to the extent that in very, very, very rare, exceedingly rare cases, like well under 0.001% of all pregnancies, to the extent that it even happens at all, it is, with technology, becoming less and less likely to happen going forward. So as a guiding principle for the questions of legality or morality surrounding abortion, it really is a red herring.
I want to play that clip of Donald Trump from 2016 when he was asked by Chris Matthews about abortion and whether there should be punishment for those who have abortion. I think it's worth playing because it's interesting. Somebody like Mike Pence, who has been engaged with the pro-life movement for a long time, he would be able to answer that question quickly and pretty easily, and said, no, we don't want to punish the mother. That's not what we're about. We're about protecting life. We're not about punishing people. But someone like Trump, who I think, as we'll see later, I'm going to play another clip from 1999. Trump's a personal commitment to a pro-life position is very questionable. So it's someone who's coming either changed to the pro-life position relatively recently, or is just saying what he thinks he needs to say to get elected. Either way, he's kind of working his way through it from a different perspective than people who have been involved in the pro-life movement for a long time. So here's the clip.
What should the law be on abortion?
Well, I have been pro-life.
I know. What should the law? I know your principle. That's a good value, but what should be the law?
This presidential election is going to be very important, because when you say what's the law, nobody knows what the law is going to be. It depends on who gets elected, because somebody's going to appoint conservative judges and somebody's going to appoint liberal judges, depending on who wins.
I've never understood the pro-life position.
Well,
I never understood it, because I understand principle. It's human life as people see it. But what crime? What crime is it?
Well, it's human life.
No. Should the woman be punished for having an abortion?
Look. I would say that it's a very serious problem, and it's a problem that we have to decide on. It's very.
But you're for
banning
it.
Are you going to say, well, wait? Are you going to say put them in jail? Is that?
Well, no, what I'm asking you, because you say you want to ban it. What's that mean?
I am pro-life. Yes.
What is ban? How do you ban abortion? How do you actually do it?
Well, you'll go back to a position like they had, where people will perhaps go to illegal places.
Yeah.
But you have to ban it.
Do you believe believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no? As a principle.
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
10 cents, 10 years,
I don't know. That I don't know. That
Why
I don't
not?
know. I don't know.
You take positions and everything else.
Frankly, I do take positions and everything else. It's a very complicated position.
I'm asking, you're running for president, I'm not. I'm asking you, what should a woman face if she chooses to have an abortion?
I'm not going to do that. I'm not
Why
going to play that game.
You said you're pro-life.
I am pro-life.
That means banning abortion.
And so is the Catholic Church pro-life.
That clip brings up something I've been thinking a lot about recently. I would call it maybe a schizophrenia or inconsistent position among pro-life people. They say abortion is murder, as Chris Matthews pointed out. so it's obviously wrong, but when somebody commits murder in a normal circumstance, of course, they have to be punished. And so if you're equating somebody going and shooting an innocent person, you're equating that with aborting an innocent baby, then it's only logical that there'd be severe punishment for a woman who undergoes abortion. And especially in a circumstance in which is the majority of abortions, where there's no rape, there's no incest, there's no danger to the mother. She didn't get raped. She's choosing to have an abortion for whatever reason. Why would you not punish a woman who has an abortion in those circumstances, which is the majority of abortions?
From a moral perspective, even those interjections that you offered don't stand up to any scrutiny at all. We don't punish children for the crimes of their parents. So the idea that just because she's raped, well, if it's her son, you don't kill the son just because of the fact that the father committed a crime. Just like you wouldn't kill someone whose parents get thrown into jail for a crime that they commit. The idea that you would potentially allow murder, if that is your moral position, on account of how the conception occurred, is a moral abomination.
And yet, the pro-life movement is very, very uncomfortable with advocating any sort of punishment for women who have abortion. And that raises a few questions. I guess the cynical version would be, do they really believe that abortion is murder? Because like we were saying, if they did, then it would be a no-brainer that you would have punishment, for at least some sort of punishment for a woman who has an abortion. And yet the pro-life movement is very adamant that they don't want to punish women. And on that point, and in May 2022, when the Dobbs decision was leaked, or as you recall, it was actually leaked about a month or two before it was issued. So this was when the position was leaked. And it was a very big surprise to a lot of people. Dobbs' decision, of course, overturned Roe v. Wade and essentially allowed each state to decide how they want to handle abortion. And so everybody was scrambling to react. And so in May 2022, right after the Dobbs decision was leaked, there was an open letter to state lawmakers from America's leading pro-life organizations. And this letter included groups like National Right to Life, Susan B. Anthony List, Americans United for Life, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and many other groups. And so the letter stated in part, quote, "Women are victims of abortion," and quote, "We state unequivocally that we do not support any measure seeking to criminalize or punish women, and we stand firmly opposed to include such penalties in legislation." So this was when everybody realized that, wow, what we've been fighting for 50 plus years, the states are finally going to have the power to essentially do whatever they want on abortion. And one of the first things that these pro-life organizations insisted on was that there not be any punishment for women, they're saying abortion is murder, but women shouldn't have any punishment if they murder their child.
I think you're drastically underestimating the importance of status. Again, I'll ask you this question point blank. Do you think it's okay to be white?
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you tell anyone that? Would you tell your employer that? Would you put that on your Facebook page?
I wouldn't put it on my Facebook page, but if someone asked me just point blank, I would say, yes, of course it's okay to be white. Yes, I would.
Okay. Well, I think that is commendable. I think that differentiates you from the vast majority of Americans. I think almost no white Americans would say that in a corporate setting now.
We're getting a little off topic, but that's interesting. How do you think the average white person would react? I mean, it would depend on the circumstances. Is this like said in jest? Is it a serious question? But generally, if somebody says, "Do you think it's okay to be white?" How do you think the average white person would respond?
They'd be caught off guard by the question, and they would be very uncomfortable. I think there would be a lot of squirming, especially if they have any awareness of kind of like what we saw with Trump. Like if they're not aware of all the baggage hanging around that statement, that phrase, then they might just give a candid answer, and they would be crucified for it. They would potentially lose their job. There'd be calls to have their licenses revoked, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, imagine if, say, the president of Harvard said that. without thinking about it. Just, yes, I think it is okay to be white, especially if it was unprompted. And so my point here, the point of this rhetorical or hypothetical exercise is to get across how important status is, because I think you and I and most people, if they're thinking about it in the privacy of their own home, most white people would not object to the statement, it's okay to be white. And yet virtually everyone knows that you can't put that on your Facebook profile. You can't put that on Instagram. Why? You believe it. Clear as day, you believe it. How could you not? I mean, you would have to almost hate yourself and want yourself to vanish if you didn't agree with that. And yet virtually everyone is afraid to say that, including people who self-identify as conservative, as Republican, as traditionalist, et cetera, et cetera. So I think status is hugely important here. Being pro-life is already a status demoter in a substantial way. And so within the confines of that already diselevated status, it is important not to put yourself in the very basement of the status ladder by saying that you believe that murderers should be punished for the murders that they commit.
Another stat that I think is relevant here, this is from the Guttmacher Institute. I'm not sure how to say it, but they say 23.7% of American women will have an abortion by age 45. And so perhaps the unavoidable conclusion of pro-lifers that abortion equals murder is too much for them to reckon with, that around a quarter of American women are murderers and belong in prison. And of course, that would, just by the basic statistics, that would include a lot of people that they know, that they're close to. Sisters, mothers, cousins, aunts. The unavoidable conclusion of their stance is that many of people they're close to belong in prison.
Well, Guttmacher is what I've heard, but looking at a pronunciation guide, it's saying Guttmacher. But to steal an observation from Charles Murray, no one should ever be made fun of for being unable to pronounce something, because what it indicates almost certainly is that they first came across that term or phrase from reading rather than hearing someone else say it. And so I think generally that's a commendable thing. If you don't know how to pronounce something, but you know what it means and you know how to read it and you know what the context is, it just shows that you are someone who is literate. Rhetorically, too, I think we're stumbling into why it is so common among the pro-life side of the argument to invoke the concept of slavery, because the overlap here is huge. From a century and a half ago, when the question of slavery, human slavery, when the question of abolition and manumission of slaves arose, the idea that it was a moral crime to enslave people would, at the time of the transition throughout the Western world in the 19th century, it would implicate a huge number of people, as in the life and social circles of those in opposition to slavery, in favor of abolition, it would implicate a huge number of their friends and family members and relatives. And so we see that here with abortion. If the position is that abortion is murder, well, then the reality that we have to face upon coming to that conclusion is that a lot of the people that we know, a lot of the friends that we have, people we work with, even family members are murderers. And that's a tough pill to swallow. But from a moral perspective, of course, that doesn't mean that it's not a pill that needs to be choked down. And to be charitable to the pro-life movement and the pro-life forces that Jeff alluded to earlier, kind of couching the criticism and trying to direct it, presumably the insinuation is that the abortion doctors there, the abortion providers, are the evil ones, and the ones who seek their services out in the first place are just innocent victims. Well, that could be just to extend the metaphor a little further, that could be like the sugar, spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down. And so even if the truth isn't delivered as hard as it maybe should be in a perfect moral universe when only philosophical considerations are being made, if the ultimate outcome is the reduction in abortion and therefore the reduction in the number of children that are murdered, well, it's still a laudable thing for those pro-life members to do.
All right, next I want to talk about abortion in the context of 2024, the U.S. presidential election. Before we get started, I do want to play a quick clip. This is Trump from 1999. He was on Meet the Press with Tim Russert.
Well, look, I'm very pro-choice. I hate the concept of abortion. I hate it. I hate everything it stands for. I cringe when I listen to people debating the subject. But I just believe in choice. But I am strongly for choice, and yet I hate the concept of abortion.
But you would not ban it?
No.
So in the intervening 25 years, what Trump has done is simply thought through to the logical conclusion of the assertion that he made in 1999. And to use a thought experiment to make that obvious, imagine instead of it being abortion prior to, or murder prior to birth, but post-conception, imagine instead we're talking about, say, a 7-year-old that a mother no longer wants to take care of any longer. Well, that 1999 version of Trump saying, I hate the idea of women being able to murder their elementary school children because they don't want to take care of them anymore. I hate it. I hate the idea of it, but you have to allow it. We just have to permit it because I believe in women's choice, the ability for women to choose. So we can see rhetorically and philosophically, morally, the more politically acceptable position that Trump espoused in 1999, just how morally deranged, detached from any sort of logical conclusion that is.
So moving back to 2024, I have this article from the Wall Street Journal dated April 12th. Headline, Trump risks losing suburban women over abortion. I'm going to read from the article. A recent Wall Street Journal poll of 7 battleground states found that 39% of suburban women cite abortion as a make or break issue for their vote, making it by far the most motivating issue for the group. Nearly 3/4 of them say the procedure should be legal all or most of the time, and a majority thinks Trump's policies are too restrictive. Biden beat Trump nationally in 2020 among suburban women by 19 percentage points, according to the AP VoteCast survey of the electorate. The Journal's recent swing state poll showed Biden leading by 17 points with that voter group in a two-way matchup, though roughly a third of suburban women were either undecided or hadn't fully committed to Trump or Biden. According to the Journal, 57% of suburban women thought Trump's policies on abortion were too restrictive. Just 20% said Biden's policies weren't restrictive enough. So it would seem that abortion is a much better issue for Biden and the Democrats than it is for Trump and the Republicans. A lot more people, at least among this specific important demographic group, suburban women, more people think that Trump is extreme on this issue, extreme in a bad way, than Biden is.
Well, that is certainly the narrative that the corporate media is trying to push, although the empirical evidence there cited in the Wall Street Journal article itself is not particularly compelling, because if we strip it down to what it's saying that in 2020, Biden beat Trump by 19 points among suburban women. And now in 2024, Biden is beating Trump by 17 points. So he's gotten 2 points worse than he did in 2020. And the salience of the abortion issue wasn't anything like in 2020 that it is now. And so it's interesting that if Trump's position on abortion is hurting him in 2024, now that it's an issue, well, it's interesting that the group that is picked out as the group that is most concerned about abortion is actually more supportive of Trump in 2024 than in 2020. And you could say, well, you could quibble and say, well, overall, Trump's support has moved 5 points favorable from 2024 to 2020 based on current polling, but among suburban women, it's only moved 2 points. And okay, that could be the case, but that's at the margins. I mean, that is almost literally within the margin of error. Irrespective of the political ramifications, I think this is a good opportunity for a, quote, teachable moment, unquote, for those of us dissidents who have a lot of frustration with the moral trajectory of the society that we live in. Keep in mind that you don't owe this society anything. This is a society that wants to legalize the mass murder of babies. If that's the position that you have, just keep that in mind when you feel some gnawing duty to comply with this society instead of objecting to it and undercutting it and subverting it whenever you have the opportunity. It's an evil society that you're existing in, and you don't owe any other people who support the moral abomination that guides and underpins so much of what goes on today. You don't owe these people anything. They prey on our good nature, our natural desire to comply with the governing structure, even if we object to the rules, and even if we're not asked or our input is undercut, they still depend quite reliably on our complicity. But I think this should serve this. There are many other issues that a similar lesson can be drawn, but I think this one, especially because it's so clear cut in the case of murdering children, murdering babies. I mean, if that isn't wrong, I don't know what is. I think it's worth noting that the society that you live under is forcing you to subsidize this and showering you with moral opprobrium if you object to it. And so keep that in mind when you're assessing what moral responsibilities you have to the society and what you should be able to do, what you can do, what restrictions exist upon you when you're up against such an evil society. Morally, you don't owe that society anything.
So I think maybe Ness disagrees, but I think the abortion issue is a big liability for Trump and the Republicans. And it seems like Trump maybe feels the same way, and that leads to this video that he just put out a week or two ago. He put it out in April 2024. I'm going to play it.
Many people have asked me what my position is on abortion and abortion rights, especially since I was proudly the person responsible for the ending of something that all legal scholars, both sides, wanted and, in fact, demanded be ended. Roe v. Wade. They wanted it ended. It must be remembered that the Democrats are the radical ones on this position because they support abortion up to and even beyond the 9th month. The concept of having an abortion in the later months and even execution after birth, and that's exactly what it is. The baby is born, the baby is executed after birth, is unacceptable, and almost everyone agrees with that. My view is now that we have abortion where everybody wanted it from a legal standpoint, the states will determine by vote or legislation or perhaps both, and whatever they decide must be the law of the land, in this case, the law of the state. Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people. You must follow your heart, or in many cases, your religion or your faith. Do what's right for your family and do what's right for yourself. Do what's right for your children. Do what's right for our country and vote. So important to vote. This 50-year battle over Roe v. Wade took it out of the federal hands and brought it into the hearts, minds, and vote of the people in each state. It was really something. Now it's up to the states to do the right thing. Like Ronald Reagan, I am strongly in favor of exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. You must follow your heart of this issue, but remember, you must also win elections to restore our culture and, in fact, to save our country, which is currently, and very sadly, a nation in decline. Our nation needs help. It needs unity. It needs us all to work closely together. Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, everyone, we have to work together. We have to bring our nation back from the brink, and that's where it is. It's at the brink, and we will. We will do it. I promise you, we will do it.
So I noticed that Trump picks the extreme, fairly rare example of a baby apparently being born live and then executed. I think in the same way that the Democrats harp on extremely, extremely rare circumstance where the mother's life is in danger. So both sides are picking phantoms, as Ness referenced earlier. I'm not sure how the pro-life movement would interpret that, because he seems to be at least tacitly acknowledging that abortion is wrong, and yet he's essentially saying, well, it is murder, but states should be able to allow murder or not.
Politically, from a tactical perspective, what Trump's doing makes perfect sense. The conventional wisdom is that, as you were referring to that Wall Street Journal article previously, the conventional wisdom is that abortion is, when it's an issue, it's beneficial for the left. It'll help Biden because it'll galvanize his supporters more than it will galvanize pro-lifers. But Trump is trying to turn that around by saying, look, this is a state level issue. It's been kicked back to the states, and 2024 is your big opportunity, your first national election opportunity, not the midterms, but in terms of the presidential election. This is your first real opportunity to make your voice heard at a state level. And so get out there and vote for candidates at the local level, down ballot, all presumably Republicans who are going to be pro-life to the extent that you support pro-life. And of course, Trump is naturally going to benefit from that if it galvanizes pro-lifers to get out at the state level. Well, they're going to pick, even if they're not especially happy with Trump's sort of middling position on abortion, it still is clearly going to be preferable to Biden's. And the fact that the take-home message is that it's going to be decided at the state level. Well, if you can have 25 or 30 states that don't kill babies anymore, that's better than all 50 of them being required by federal judicial injunction to permit the murdering process to continue unabated.
In another sign of Trump seemingly moderating on the abortion issue, he stated on April 10, 2024, that he would not sign a national abortion ban if elected to the White House again, which is a reversal of a promise that he made as a candidate in 2016, and which I don't believe he ever rescinded or pulled back on during his first term in office. So another story I want to cover real quickly, Arizona Supreme Court ruling. On April 9th, the Arizona State Supreme Court ruled that the state must adhere to a 160-year-old law banning all abortions, quote, except those necessary to save a woman's life. The law at the center of the ruling predates Arizona's statehood. Mainstream media is quick to point out that the law is a, quote, Civil War era law, I guess the implication being that it's racist. And so Trump called on the state's Republican-controlled legislature and Democratic governor to amend the law. He said, as you know, it's all about states' rights. That'll be straightened out, he told reporters. Quote, and I'm sure that the governor and everybody else are going to bring it back into reason, and that will be taken care of, I think, very quickly. So I'm not sure why he would want this Arizona to change the law. It seems like this is a states' right issue. This is a valid law in Arizona that essentially bans abortion except for rare circumstances. So my take on all of this is that Trump thinks abortion could be a dangerous issue for him, and he's trying to moderate and move to where the average American is, which is not where his base is. And Kari Lake, the Republican frontrunner for the Arizona Senate race, who recently lost the governorship in Arizona, she disavowed the law, even though she had previously called the 1864 ban, quote, a great law during her campaign for governor in 2022. But someone who was happy with this Arizona Supreme Court's decision was the president of the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America organization. She praised the Arizona ruling as a, quote, enormous victory for unborn children and their mothers.
Politicians eschewing moral consistency in favor of political expediency. I've never heard of such a thing. Look, I think it's great that it's at the state level. The more differentiated by state, the better, because while I am, as you've probably picked up on, not a supporter of abortion, there is one abortion I am vehemently in support of, and that is the abortion of the United States as a unified political entity. So federalism, localism, the disbanding of the United States empire is something that I am completely in support of the abortion of.
We've had some indication of how Biden is going to address the abortion issue. The Democrats clearly think that abortion is a winning issue for them, and so they're bringing it up a lot. And we saw this ad. I'm going to play an ad from about 9 days ago. There's some text involved in the ad, so I'm going to interject as the ad plays. So this ad is called Willow's Box. So the ad starts with text on the screen. In 2022, Josh and Amanda were expecting their first baby, Willow, and it's a young white couple.
This is one of our Willow boxes. This is just filled with some of the things that we had started gathering for her while I was pregnant.
Yep.
There's her little baby book.
At 18 weeks, Amanda's water broke and she had a miscarriage. Because Donald Trump killed Roe v. Wade, Amanda was denied standard medical care to prevent an infection. Doctors were forced to send her home.
The blanket that she was in.
3 days later, Amanda was in the ICU with sepsis. She almost died twice.
Her little footprints.
The infection caused so much damage, Amanda may never get pregnant again. And now her husband is cradling her as she cries. Donald Trump did this.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
So just from a pure political standpoint, I think this is a brilliant ad. It's an attractive young white couple. It's targeting exactly the demographic we were talking with that Wall Street Journal article, the suburban women, overwhelmingly white, who rate abortion as a very important issue.
Well, sure, this is more appealing than the demonic types who bake cakes to celebrate all the abortions they have, or the screaming harpies with the pussy hats. Of course, really from start to finish, it's all BS. First of all, it's unclear. It hasn't been legally challenged yet, but it seems like most legal scholars believe that the ability to remove a dead fetus from a woman's body does not constitute an abortion under Texas law. And if these physicians and these people had the courage of their convictions in support of the choice movement, they would test that, or she could have gone to another state to test that. So there's a lot of insinuations here that she couldn't get the miscarriage removed, but that this could have been a case where that precedent would have been challenged legally. And then the idea that the issue with fertility and problems with fertility is on account of the pro-life movement. And if only people who would get in line with the pro-choice movement, then middle-class women would be able to have children, because right now they're unable to do so. Logically, it makes no sense. Emotionally, I suppose it is compelling, and it's directed at suburban women. So emotion over rationality over logical consistency. Well, the stereotype exists for a reason.
Little background on the case I found in Associated Press article. Amanda Zerwowski, that's the woman in the ad, she sued Texas, claiming that she nearly died from a miscarriage. The case is being reviewed by the Texas Supreme Court. Shortly after Roe fell, a trigger law went into effect in Texas that bans abortion in most circumstances. Under the law in Texas, doctors who perform abortions risk life in prison and fines of up to $100,000. Opponents say that has left some women with providers who are unwilling to even discuss ending a pregnancy. There are medical exceptions to Texas's abortion ban, but late last month, the Texas Medical Board declined to provide a list of specific circumstances. Some physicians say the law is dangerously unclear.
So in all of Texas, she couldn't find one physician who would challenge the unclear ruling. Talk about profile and courage among these pro-choice physicians. It is worth noting, when the power of the state is behind them, then the left will act with impunity because they don't face any actual consequences. But when they do face consequences, you see in a state like Texas with 30 million people, you don't have anyone apparently who will challenge the state at personal risk. Say what you will about pro-lifers. There are a lot of pro-lifers who do face the wrath of the state, standing up for what it is that they believe in morally. You can't say the same, at least in the state of Texas, it looks like, for physicians who are pro-choice. But even when the legal ramifications of their potential decision to remove a miscarried baby from a woman at potential jeopardy to their own professional status. None of them were willing to do so.
I'm a little more sympathetic to this situation and to this woman. It sounds like this was a pretty exigent circumstance, so I'm not sure it'd be realistic for her to be able to send out a call to the whole state or to the whole area for a physician to perform something on such short notice and with such unknown legal jeopardy. I'm not sure it's fair to expect her to have been able to use this as a test case.
I'd be more sympathetic to her if she wasn't trying to exploit this for a federal presidential election campaign to allow her emotional pain, putative emotional pain, to be harvested this way.
Well, if nothing else, I think this episode has shown that abortion is going to be a huge issue between now and November. So, you've been listening to The Reality Taboo. Please remember, like, share, subscribe. We'll talk with you next time.